Imagine a world where the story you have been told about the discovery of America is just the tip of the iceberg. For centuries, textbooks have claimed that Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492. But the truth is far more complex and far more fascinating. Long before Columbus ever set sail from Spain, these lands were already home to thriving communities. Native Americans had been cultivating, building, and thriving across the continent for thousands of years. And perhaps even more surprising, evidence shows that Africans had arrived in the Americas centuries before Columbus, bringing with them knowledge, culture, and skills that would leave a lasting mark on the civilizations they encountered. From advanced maritime expertise to agricultural knowledge, these early African explorers navigated vast oceans in well-constructed vessels, trading, settling, and influencing the societies they met. Archaeological discoveries, including monumental stone sculptures, ancient pyramids, and artifacts, reveal connections that challenge the conventional narrative. Linguistic, botanical, and cultural clues further suggest a deep and enduring African presence in the New World long before European explorers ever set foot on these shores. Today, we are going to peel back the layers of history and explore this untold story, tracing the footsteps of the first Africans who crossed the Atlantic and uncovering the civilizations they shaped along the way. You will see how their contributions helped lay the foundations for Mesoamerican societies, from the Olmecs to the Mayans, and why this history has been largely overlooked. If you want to discover the hidden chapters of early American history and understand how Africans played a key role in shaping the Americas, hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening explorations into the past. Let us dive in and uncover the real story behind America's first people. Long before the year 1492, when history books claim that Columbus first set foot in the Americas, another story was quietly unfolding across the vast oceans, one that history has largely ignored. Centuries before European sails cut through the Atlantic, Black Africans had already ventured across these waters, navigating skillfully with vessels that were marvels of engineering for their time. These early explorers were not aimless wanderers. They were experienced seafarers, carrying with them knowledge of agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy, and governance, ready to establish connections and influence the lands they reached. Archaeological discoveries and historical records suggest that their presence was not fleeting or accidental, but rather a sustained engagement with the New World that left traces still visible today. In the tropical regions of Mesoamerica, monumental evidence speaks to this enduring influence. The Olmec civilization, which emerged around 1200 BC, is widely regarded as the mother culture of Mexico, introducing written language, advanced mathematics, urban planning, and complex social structures long before the arrival of Europeans. The massive stone heads unearthed in Veracruz and Tabasco, depicting distinct African facial features with broad noses, full lips, and helmet-like headdresses, provide compelling proof of African presence. These sculptures are more than artistic expressions. They are historical testimonies of a people whose skills, culture, and innovations were transplanted across continents, leaving an indelible mark on early American civilizations. Further evidence comes from the botanical and metallurgical records that tie West Africa to the Americas. Plants such as yam, sweet potatoes, and cotton appear in both regions long before documented European contact, suggesting deliberate transfer or shared agricultural knowledge. Similarly, gold-tipped metal spearheads found in the Caribbean, analyzed by modern metallurgists, match alloys used by West African warriors centuries earlier, revealing trade, exchange, and cultural diffusion that predate Columbus by over a millennium. Even linguistic patterns and place names hint at connections between African languages and early American societies, weaving a tapestry of influence that spans oceans and centuries. The story of these early African explorers is also preserved in the accounts of later European voyagers, including Columbus himself, who recorded in his journals that the indigenous people spoke of black-skinned visitors arriving in large boats from the south and southeast. While traditional narratives often dismiss these reports, modern scholarship increasingly acknowledges the sophistication of African maritime skills and the plausibility of transatlantic voyages long before European exploration. Dugout canoes lashed together for stability, papyrus rafts, and other seafaring technologies enabled Africans to traverse the Atlantic, demonstrating ingenuity and courage in an era when the ocean itself was perceived as an insurmountable barrier. This evidence collectively challenges the conventional Eurocentric view of American history, revealing a continent already connected to distant civilizations, shaped in part by the knowledge, artistry, and labor of African explorers. Their presence was not incidental, it was foundational, influencing architecture, agriculture, religious practices, and societal organization. Recognizing this early African influence provides a fuller understanding of the Americas' pre-Columbian history and underscores the interconnectedness of human civilizations, highlighting that the story of discovery is far richer and more complex than the tale of a single European navigator arriving on unknown shores. The legacy of these early Africans endures in the monuments they left, the crops they cultivated, and the cultural imprints that continue to inform the tapestry of American history. At the dawn of the 20th century, a scholar named Leo Weiner began to piece together a narrative that challenged the very foundations of what the world believed about the Americas. A narrative that extended the timeline of African presence across the Atlantic by centuries. Weiner, trained in linguistics and deeply curious about the movements of human cultures, traveled to Mesoamerica and immersed himself in the remnants of ancient civilizations, observing patterns in language, agriculture, and material culture that seemed to echo distant lands across the ocean. He noted that the names of certain plants, the structure of local dialects, and even the composition of metal artifacts bore striking resemblance to those found in West Africa, suggesting a profound connection that conventional histories had overlooked or dismissed. What fascinated Weiner most was the meticulous detail with which African knowledge appeared to have been transplanted into the Americas. Botanical evidence, for instance, revealed crops such as yams and certain gourds flourishing in regions where they could not have originated independently, pointing toward deliberate introduction by skilled farmers who understood their cultivation and uses. Metallurgical analysis further reinforced this connection. Spearheads and ornaments recovered from pre-Columbian sites were composed of alloys identical to those used in West Africa, a combination of gold, silver, and copper that carried the distinct mark of African craftsmanship. These discoveries were more than coincidental similarities, they were footprints of a civilization that had mastered the art of navigation, agriculture, and metallurgy long before Columbus' arrival, leaving a legacy across the oceans that modern scholarship was only beginning to recognize. Weiner's work also extended to linguistics, where he drew parallels between the phonetics and vocabulary of certain Mesoamerican languages and Bantu languages from Africa. He observed patterns in word formation and meaning that were unlikely to have developed independently, hinting at a flow of knowledge and communication across great distances. His observations suggested that African travelers were not merely passing through, but interacting meaningfully with the peoples they encountered, exchanging ideas, teaching techniques, and perhaps even influencing social and political structures. These interactions painted a picture of a vibrant and interconnected world, one in which the Americas were not isolated, but part of a broader network of civilizations that spanned continents and oceans. Despite the significance of his findings, Wynberg faced skepticism, largely because it contradicted entrenched Eurocentric narratives that had dominated historical scholarship for centuries. Yet, as modern archaeology, anthropology, and genetics have advanced, many of the patterns Wynberg identified have gained further support. Sites containing African-style sculptures, ancient pyramids reflecting Old World architectural principles, and traces of African crops and materials in precolumbian contexts lend credence to his early insights. His pioneering approach opened the door to reconsidering the timeline of human migration and the agency of African civilizations in shaping the Americas long before European contact. Wynberg's scholarship reminds us that history is not a static tale but a mosaic of discoveries waiting to be connected. By tracing linguistic threads, botanical transfers, and metallurgical signatures, he illuminated a chapter of the past where African ingenuity, exploration, and cultural influence were integral to the story of the Americas. The evidence he unearthed invites us to look beyond the narrow confines of textbooks and reconsider the forces and peoples that contributed to the development of early American societies, revealing a history far richer, more complex, and profoundly interconnected than previously imagined, where the contributions of African explorers and settlers are not just footnotes but central to understanding the human journey across oceans and continents. Long before the European age of exploration, long before Columbus sailed the Atlantic in search of new lands, Africans had already mastered the art of shipbuilding and navigation in ways that allowed them to traverse vast oceans with remarkable skill and confidence. Across the West African coasts, civilizations had developed vessels of extraordinary size and durability, capable of carrying dozens of men, their provisions, and the knowledge they needed for extended journeys. These were not simple rafts or fragile crafts. They were carefully designed, expertly constructed ships that reflected centuries of maritime tradition, a combination of ingenuity, observation, and practical experience passed down through generations. Archaeological evidence, historical accounts, and oral traditions all point to the fact that Africans were not only adept at navigating rivers and coastal waters but were equally skilled at confronting the unpredictable challenges of the open Atlantic. Their ships included large dugout canoes lashed together for stability, papyrus rafts reinforced with bundles and sails, and other hybrid constructions capable of long-distance travel, illustrating a sophisticated understanding of buoyancy, balance, and the dynamics of ocean currents. The historical record provides compelling anecdotes of these early transatlantic journeys. In the early 14th century, chronicles from the Mali Empire describe King Abubakar I commissioning a fleet of hundreds of ships, each equipped with crews, supplies, and knowledge of seafaring techniques, to explore lands beyond the horizon. While only fragments of these expeditions returned, the accounts testify to a deliberate, organized attempt to explore distant continents, long before European navigators sought to chart the same waters. These voyages were not random or accidental. They were expressions of curiosity, ambition, and the desire to extend trade networks. Cultural influence and knowledge across the seas. Mariners from West Africa demonstrated extraordinary endurance and navigational precision, often relying on the stars, coastal landmarks, and ocean currents to guide them across thousands of miles of open water. Their accomplishments challenged the notion that the Atlantic was an insurmountable barrier, revealing instead a tradition of maritime confidence and daring that predates the supposed discovery of the Americas. Physical evidence supports the idea that African seafarers reached the Americas long before Columbus. Scholars have pointed to artifacts such as metal spearheads, crafted from alloys identical to those used in West Africa, found along the Caribbean coasts and in Mesoamerican archaeological sites. Botanical transfers, including yams. bottle gourds, and other domesticated plants native to Africa but flourishing in pre-Columbian America, indicate purposeful transport across oceans, likely facilitated by these skilled mariners. Linguistic traces and cultural practices further reinforce the story, demonstrating that these early arrivals did more than pass through. They interacted, influenced local societies, and contributed to the foundations of civilizations such as the Olmecs, whose monumental stone heads bear unmistakable African features. These interconnected pieces of evidence portray a world in which Africans were active participants in shaping the Americas, bringing with them technologies, knowledge, and cultural practices that would resonate for centuries. The story of African shipbuilding and transatlantic exploration challenges conventional histories that depict Europeans as the first to master the seas. It reveals a legacy of ingenuity, courage, and determination, highlighting a maritime tradition rooted in centuries of experience, observation, and technical skill. By recognizing the contributions of these early African explorers, we gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of the peopling and development of the Americas, seeing the continent not as an isolated frontier awaiting European discovery, but as a space already engaged with global currents of culture, technology, and human endeavor. These long-forgotten voyages remind us that the oceans were not barriers but bridges, and that African mastery of the seas played a pivotal role in the unfolding story of human exploration, settlement, and the cross-cultural connections that shaped the world long before Columbus embarked on his famous journey across the Americas. Long before European ships arrived on distant shores, evidence of African influence quietly permeated the land, revealing a legacy of cultural exchange, agricultural innovation, and spiritual continuity that has too often been overlooked. The presence of plants such as yams, sweet potatoes, and cotton in pre-Columbian America offers more than a mere botanical curiosity. It is a testament to intentional human agency, a reflection of the knowledge and expertise that African travelers brought with them during their transatlantic journeys. These crops, carefully cultivated and adapted to local conditions, demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of agriculture, irrigation, and food security, pointing to an enduring impact on early American societies. The sweet potato, originating from tropical regions of Africa, thrived across the Americas centuries before European contact, while cotton and other domesticated plants shaped the economic and social structures of emerging communities, signaling a transfer of both material and intellectual wealth across the ocean. This movement of flora was not accidental, but part of a broader pattern of cultural and technological exchange that accompanied the arrival of African explorers, traders, and settlers. Beyond agriculture, the imprint of African cultural practices can be traced in the spiritual and religious life of early American civilizations. Rituals, symbols, and artistic motifs reveal striking similarities with West African traditions, suggesting that these early arrivals carried with them a worldview rich in cosmology, sacred knowledge, and communal values. For instance, the depictions of deities in Mesoamerican sites, often with distinct African facial features and stylistic elements, echo religious iconography from regions such as the Nile Valley and West Africa, reflecting shared concepts of divine authority, spiritual hierarchy, and ceremonial practice. Wall paintings, temple carvings, and monumental architecture carry visual languages that resonate with African cosmologies, suggesting a continuity of thought that transcended the vast Atlantic, and illustrating that the early Americas were not isolated but participated in a broader exchange of ideas, beliefs, and cultural frameworks. The interplay of botanical, cultural, and technological influences paints a vivid picture of a pre-Columbian Americas shaped in part by African ingenuity and exploration. Dugout canoes and papyrus vessels made possible the transatlantic movement of both people and plants, while linguistic traces in place names and oral traditions reveal the subtle ways African languages and knowledge systems intertwined with local customs. The Olmec civilization, with its massive stone heads bearing unmistakably African features, stands as a monumental testament to this presence, while the pyramids and ceremonial centers constructed in regions such as Veracruz and Tabasco reflect architectural principles and cosmological knowledge likely influenced by African visitors. Every carved monument, every cultivated field, and every ritual site serves as a reminder that the Americas were part of a dynamic web of human interaction long before European explorers claimed discovery. Recognizing these contributions challenges conventional narratives that marginalize African agency in history, highlighting instead a continuum of exploration, knowledge transfer, and cultural resilience that shaped the development of early American societies. From the cultivation of yams and cotton to the enactment of sacred rituals, the threads of African presence are woven into the very fabric of the continent, offering insights into how civilizations adapted, thrived, and interconnected across ocean. By tracing these connections, we uncover a story of ingenuity and adaptation, a history in which African travelers were not passive observers but active participants. Shaping agriculture, religion, and culture in ways that resonated for centuries. The evidence of these exchanges underscores a broader truth. The Americas were never an isolated land awaiting European arrival but a vibrant, evolving landscape enriched by the knowledge, practices, and enduring influence of African peoples whose legacy remains embedded in the soil, the spiritual life, and the enduring cultural memory of the continent. The Olmec civilization, flourishing between 1200 and 400 BC in what is now the states of Veracruz and Tabasco in Mexico, represents one of the earliest and most sophisticated examples of human ingenuity in the Americas, and their monumental achievements continue to captivate historians and archaeologists alike. Among the most striking evidence of their presence are the colossal stone heads, some reaching over 11 feet in height and weighing dozens of tons, carved with features unmistakably African in appearance: broad noses, full lips, and pronounced cheekbones serving as silent witnesses to a people whose origins and cultural influences extended far beyond the Americas. These heads, meticulously crafted from basalt transported over great distances, were not mere artistic exercises. They embodied the political and spiritual authority of Olmec rulers and reflected a society that had mastered engineering, labor organization, and monumental construction centuries before the arrival of European explorers. Each head, with its intricate details and imposing scale, tells a story of a civilization capable of translating abstract concepts of power, identity, and religious significance into tangible, enduring forms that continue to awe observers today. Yet, the Olmecs' contributions went far beyond their monumental art. They pioneered written language systems in Mesoamerica, developing symbols and inscriptions that conveyed complex ideas, rituals, and administrative information, laying the foundation for subsequent civilizations such as the Maya and the Aztec. Their numerical understanding and calendrical innovations reveal a sophisticated grasp of mathematics and astronomy, enabling the Olmecs to plan agricultural cycles, ceremonial events, and urban development with remarkable precision. These advancements were not isolated accomplishments, but part of an integrated societal framework in which governance, religion, education, and community life were interwoven, reflecting a deep comprehension of both human and environmental dynamics. The careful alignment of ceremonial centers, the construction of pyramidal platforms, and the organized layout of early urban settlements illustrate that the Olmecs were not only builders but planners, thinkers, and visionaries who understood the importance of spatial organization and architectural symbolism in expressing cultural values and social hierarchies. The Olmecs' influence extended into the spiritual and artistic realms as well, as evidenced by ritual artifacts, jade figurines, and ceremonial masks that echo African artistic motifs and cosmological themes. Their religious practices, centered around deities often depicted with distinctly African traits, suggest a transmission of belief systems and symbolic language that accompanied migrations or exchanges across the Atlantic, intertwining with local traditions to create a unique cultural synthesis. This cultural richness was mirrored in their agricultural innovations, as they cultivated maize, cacao, and other staple crops with techniques that ensured sustainability and social stability, providing the economic backbone for a civilization that thrived for centuries in the tropical lowlands of Mesoamerica. Every aspect of Olmec life, from the monumental to the mundane, demonstrates a capacity for organization, adaptation, and creativity that challenges simplistic notions of pre-Columbian history and emphasizes the interconnectedness of ancient human societies across continents. In tracing the legacy of the Olmecs, one sees a civilization that embodies the broader narrative of African influence in the Americas, a civilization whose art, science, and urban planning illuminate the intellectual and cultural vitality that Africans contributed to the New World long before European explorers arrived. Their colossal heads stand not only as artistic marvels but as enduring symbols of innovation, resilience, and the ability of human societies to shape their environment, communicate complex ideas, and construct enduring legacies. By understanding the Olmecs in the context of African presence and influence, we gain a richer, more nuanced appreciation of the Americas as a crossroads of ideas, peoples, and traditions, where knowledge, skill, and culture traveled across oceans, leaving indelible marks on the history and development of the continent that resonate even today. Across the vast landscapes of North and South America, archaeologists and historians have uncovered compelling evidence that paints a vivid picture of early African presence long before the voyages of Columbus. And each discovery deepens our understanding of a history that has been overlooked for centuries. In the Caribbean and the Virgin Islands, skeletal remains identified as belonging to people of African descent have been unearthed, with radiocarbon dating placing them centuries before European colonization, challenging the notion that Africans only arrived in the Americas as slaves during the transatlantic trade. These finds, carefully documented by institutions such as the Smithsonian and confirmed by independent scholars, reveal not only the longevity of African settlement in the New World, but also their integration into local ecosystems and societies, suggesting a level of adaptation and cultural transmission that defies conventional timelines. In addition to skeletal evidence, monumental architecture across the Americas points unmistakably to advanced knowledge and craftsmanship consistent with African traditions. The pyramids of Mesoamerica, for example, demonstrate construction techniques, alignment, and spatial sophistication reminiscent of those in ancient Egypt and West Africa, suggesting that knowledge of pyramid building traversed the Atlantic long before Europeans arrived. These pyramids, from Tabasco to Veracruz in Mexico, not only served ceremonial and religious purposes but also acted as hubs of governance and community organization, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and urban planning that could only have been developed over centuries of experimentation and observation. Their sheer scale and precision indicate a society well versed in engineering and coordinated labor, capable of mobilizing resources and knowledge in ways that would influence subsequent civilizations, including the Maya and Aztec. Artifacts discovered alongside these structures' tools, pottery, ceremonial objects, and intricate carvings further attest to the African connection. The stylistic elements of certain pottery and sculptures show parallels with West African motifs, while ritual artifacts echo religious practices and symbolic frameworks originating in Africa, suggesting cultural continuity and adaptation across continents. In the southeastern United States, Mound-building cultures such as the Cahokia complex demonstrate not only advanced social organization, but also alignments and ceremonial practices that reflect knowledge systems comparable to those found in African civilizations, indicating that African descendant peoples played a formative role in shaping the spiritual and civic landscapes of early America. Even botanical evidence supports this narrative, as crops and plants traditionally associated with Africa, such as yams and certain gourds, appear in precolumbian contexts throughout the Americas, implying the transfer of agricultural knowledge alongside maritime exploration. The combination of human remains, monumental architecture, artifacts, and botanical markers paints a compelling and cohesive story. Africans were not passive observers but active participants in the creation of American civilizations, bringing skills, cultural knowledge, and technological innovations that left an enduring legacy. Each new discovery, whether a carefully excavated skeleton, a towering stone structure, or a fragment of pottery, reinforces the notion that the Americas were a site of rich, interconnected histories, where African ingenuity helped shape societies thousands of years before European claims of discovery. Viewed together, these findings disrupt traditional narratives that confine African history in the Americas to the post-Columbian slave trade and instead highlight a much earlier, dynamic presence, one in which Africans contributed to the very foundations of New World civilizations. From monumental pyramids and colossal stone heads to intricate artifacts and enduring agricultural practices, the evidence forms a continuous thread that underscores the sophistication, resilience, and creativity of African descendant peoples across the Americas. Recognizing this early settlement not only enriches our understanding of pre-Columbian history, but also honors the profound and lasting impact that African explorers, settlers, and innovators had on shaping the cultural, spiritual, and technological landscapes of the continents that would later be transformed by European colonization. Long before the pages of European exploration were filled with tales of discovery, records and journals hint at a far older and more complex story of the Americas, one that centers on black-skinned peoples who traversed the seas and engaged in trade long before Columbus' arrival. Among the most striking pieces of evidence are Columbus' own diary entries from his second voyage, in which he described the Native Americans presenting him with gold-tipped spearheads and other metal objects said to have come from black-skinned people arriving by large boats from the south and southeast. The meticulous detail in these descriptions, the alloy composition of gold, silver, and copper, the craftsmanship of the spearheads, and even the local name guanin for the metal mirrors practices documented in West Africa, particularly among Mali and Moorish metallurgists, suggesting a direct cultural and technological link between the African continent and pre-Columbian America. Columbus, perhaps unknowingly, chronicled an encounter with a network of African explorers who had already mastered maritime navigation, trade, and metallurgy, leaving traces of their presence for careful observers to detect centuries later. These accounts gain further depth when considered alongside the broader context of African seafaring tradition. Scholars such as Leo Wiener highlighted linguistic, botanical, and cultural parallels between West Africa and the Americas, suggesting that the presence of these artifacts was not an isolated incident, but part of a much larger pattern of exploration and exchange. The spearheads themselves become more than mere objects. They symbolize a connection between continents, a tangible proof that Africans not only reached the Americas but actively participated in its pre-Columbian economic and cultural life. The fact that Columbus recorded these items, yet European narratives would later overlook or dismiss them, illustrates how history was selectively told, often privileging European discovery while ignoring evidence of earlier African presence. Further corroboration comes from other European explorers and chroniclers who noted encounters with dark-skinned peoples in the Caribbean and along the coasts of the Americas. These testimonies, when combined with archaeological finds such as African descendant skeletons, monumental stone structures, and artifacts that mirror African craftsmanship, create a cohesive picture of an active African presence long before the 15th century. The spearheads, in particular, encapsulate this historical reality. They are artifacts of trade, of movement, and of sophisticated knowledge of metallurgy that had traversed the Atlantic independently of European intervention. By analyzing their composition and comparing them to West African metalwork, modern researchers can trace the journey of both material and culture, highlighting a transatlantic connection that predates the so-called Age of Discovery. The story these journals tell is not simply one of objects changing hands. It is a story of skill, courage, and navigational expertise, of a people who ventured across vast and unpredictable waters and left enduring marks on a new continent. The gold-tipped spearheads and their presence in Caribbean societies indicate that Africans were known, respected, and influential figures in the Americas long before European claims of discovery, embedding themselves into the fabric of early civilizations. They reveal a historical narrative in which Africans were explorers, traders, and settlers, shaping societies, technologies, and cultural practices that would resonate for generations. By returning to these primary sources and listening to the details recorded by Columbus and others, we uncover a deeper, richer history of the Americas, one in which black-skinned peoples were not late arrivals, but active participants in the creation and sustenance of precolumbian civilizations, leaving behind artifacts that silently testify to their journeys, knowledge, and enduring impact on the New World. Long before European ships punctuated the horizon of the Americas, the lands were already alive with the presence of peoples whose origins spanned continents, carrying with them rich cultures, knowledge, and traditions that would shape the very fabric of the New World. Among the earliest settlers were Africans, whose seafaring expertise and sophisticated maritime technology allowed them to traverse the Atlantic and establish a foothold in the Americas thousands of years before Columbus. These early African communities brought with them not only material culture and crops but also systems of governance, spiritual practices, and artistic expression that would leave an indelible mark on the lands they inhabited. Their settlements were not isolated. Through trade, exploration, and interaction, they contributed to the development of complex societies, laying the groundwork for emerging civilizations across Mesoamerica and beyond. As centuries passed, the story of settlement in the Americas expanded with the arrival of Asian populations, migrating over the Bering Land Bridge and through northern passages, bringing new technologies, survival strategies, and cultural practices. The convergence of African and Asian lineages created a tapestry of interaction, exchange, and adaptation, producing early societies that were far more intricate and interconnected than often recognized in conventional narratives. Africans, with their knowledge of agriculture, metallurgy, and seafaring, influenced the organization of communities, while the newcomers from Asia introduced new forms of hunting, craftsmanship, and environmental adaptation, blending skills and traditions in ways that transformed the landscape and the social structures of early American peoples. The evidence of this synthesis is apparent in the construction of monumental earthworks, advanced agricultural terraces, and complex settlement patterns, which reflect the ingenuity and collaborative knowledge of these diverse populations. Archaeological and anthropological studies reveal that these interactions were not merely incidental but foundational in shaping what we now consider Native American societies. The Africans who arrived first imparted innovations such as sophisticated metalworking, cultivated crops, and spiritual rituals, while Asian arrivals contributed knowledge of tool-making, navigation of northern climates, and social structures optimized for survival in varying environments. Over generations, the intermingling of these populations led to the emergence of distinct cultural identities, yet traces of their origins African, Asian, and eventually their syncretic forms remain etched in language, art, and material culture throughout the Americas. The development of agriculture, astronomy, and early urban centers in regions such as Mesoamerica and the Mississippi Valley can be traced to this profound exchange, demonstrating that the Americas' earliest civilizations were products of global knowledge flows rather than isolated inventions. Furthermore, genetic, linguistic, and cultural evidence underscores the deep-rooted African presence prior to European contact, reinforcing the idea that African settlers played a critical role in shaping early societies. The arrival of Asian populations did not erase these contributions but merged with them, producing a dynamic and resilient foundation upon which later Native American civilizations flourished. Together, these early settlers cultivated the land, established trade networks, and developed religious and artistic traditions that would influence subsequent generations and inform the heritage of the continent. In recounting this pre-Columbian history, we uncover a story of interconnectedness and innovation, a history in which Africans were not passive arrivals but pioneering settlers whose impact, alongside that of Asian migrants, created the mosaic of early American society long before the first Europeans arrived. As we reflect on the extraordinary journey of African peoples to the Americas long before Columbus, it becomes clear that their contributions have been systematically ignored or marginalized in mainstream history. For centuries, the narrative taught in schools and perpetuated by popular media has emphasized the arrival of Europeans as the starting point of civilization in the New World, while the achievements of African skilled sailors, builders, scientists, and thinkers have been overshadowed by the tragic story of slavery. Yet the evidence is undeniable. From the Olmec civilization with its monumental stone heads and sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, writing, and city building, to the agricultural, linguistic, and cultural imprints left across the Americas, Africans played a foundational role in shaping the societies they encountered. Archaeological finds, botanical studies, and historical accounts, including the journals of Columbus himself, attest to African presence and influence. Yet these truths have often been ignored or dismissed by those invested in Eurocentric versions of history. By revisiting these stories, we not only honor the resilience and ingenuity of early African explorers and settlers, but also challenge the simplistic and incomplete histories that have dominated for too long. Understanding that African contributions laid the groundwork for thriving civilizations in the Americas reshapes our perspective on what it means to be discovered or civilized, reminding us that innovation, culture, and knowledge are not the sole domain of any single people. Acknowledging these truths does not diminish other histories. Rather, it enriches our collective understanding and gives long overdue recognition to the communities whose achievements have been hidden or marginalized. It is important that we continue to explore and share these untold stories, ensuring that future generations can see the full tapestry of human history. By learning about the early African presence in the Americas, we gain a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of human societies and the richness of cultural exchange long before the transatlantic slave trade. This knowledge empowers us to question the assumptions passed down through conventional narratives and to celebrate the diversity of experiences and contributions that truly define our past. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery and reflection. If you found this story enlightening and want to continue exploring untold chapters of history with us, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Sharing this video with your friends and family will help spread awareness of the rich, complex, and inspiring history of African contributions to the Americas, ensuring that these stories receive the recognition they deserve. Your support allows us to keep uncovering and sharing the hidden truths that challenge conventional narratives and celebrate the remarkable achievements of people who history too often forgot.